Welcome back to the home front. I'm your host, Reed Galen. Today, I'm once again joined by journalist Abigail Tracy. Abby and I have now been doing this, I think, since long before the end of the 2024 election. Abby, it's been a minute since we've had you, so welcome back.
Thank you so much for having me back. Yeah, it feels like, I don't know if it feels like an eternity or a minute. Yes.
A little bit of both, right?
hmm
Yes, it's like parenting, right? The days are long and the years are short. In our world, the days are long and the years are long. So, Abby, I've spent most of the last 2 weeks on the road, so I'm a little crispy, to be honest with you. And so, I had three things that I wanted to discuss. One of them was, as we're recording this on Wednesday evening, is the big win for the good guys, I'm going to call them, in the Wisconsin Supreme Court race. The second is the new obsession with Cory Booker and being able to stand on your feet and talk for 25 hours. And then the last piece is the insideriest of the insiders. There's an outlet called Puck, and on one of their things this week, they had the consultant cavalcade in the Democratic Party for the 2028 presidential campaign, which when I read at 38,000 feet on a red eye, I wanted to throw my phone out the window, but that would have caused a lot of trouble for everybody. But let's start with Wisconsin. So, guys, Wisconsin has this weird Supreme Court system where there are term-limited members of their high court, and I think the elections, Abby, are like every 10 years. And for some reason, the latest set of them, we had one last year in 2024. We've had one now here in 2025. There will be another one in 2026. And so the reason why this is so important is because what we have seen in Wisconsin over the past few years is that the Republican majority and the state legislature has consistently massively gerrymandered legislative and congressional districts. They are pushing, the conservatives in the state house there have pushed more conservative things on abortion rights and et cetera, et cetera. So when Janet Protasewicz won the Supreme Court race last year, that gave the liberals a 1-seat majority. I believe that they now have a 2-seat majority, although I could be wrong about that. The point is that it gives the opportunity for Democrats in the state to potentially pick up as many as 2 new congressional districts, because theoretically, with this politicized Supreme Court, which I guess they all are now, they could help redraw the lines to switch out how the lines have been drawn. So that's the practical on the ground thing. Which does have real world outcomes, both for the people of Wisconsin, for the U.S. Congress, and other things. But also, this was $100 million Supreme Court race, which is crazy in and of itself, and featured a live and in-person event by none other than billionaire Elon Musk, who put something like $25 million into the race, was offering people $100 a pop to sign a petition, and was offering $1 million to a bunch of people, I think one of which was actually the executive director of the Republican Party there in Wisconsin. So, hey, listen, pal, good on you, I guess. But give us your sense of the dynamics of that. I know you're from next door, but that part of the world, why do you think you sent us a map the other day of every county in Wisconsin moved Democratic to the left, I guess, over the course of this campaign. So give us your sense of it.
Well, I think it's actually really interesting to think about. So as you pointed out, this isn't, obviously these races are cyclical, they come up, as you said, like every 10 years or so. But I really actually think that what we saw in this race was building on the momentum of a year ago when, Democrats really talked about this race and like invested in the fact that like, hey, people pay attention to this. Like the Supreme Court in Wisconsin really does matter. And I think the state itself, what we saw in terms of this election and in terms of turnout, like that the importance of this race at a state level was already kind of there. Like it was already instilled in the people of the state. And then, Democrats are, even though it's technically a nonpartisan race, but it's obviously partisan, they were really able to like build on that and like build on sort of the recognition and the fact that there was like a real awareness around this. But I also think one of the things that was very clear, which was sort of interesting, especially when we look at this versus, the 2024 election, one thing that was very interesting to me is in this race, Democrats, or the quote unquote like liberal candidate and the Democrats backing her, they really didn't talk about Trump or Musk that much. Like they really actually avoided that discussion in terms of their, pitching her as the alternative,
Mm-hmm.
which was fascinating in that Musk just so completely inserted himself into the race, and I think honestly shot himself in the foot in terms of just like how obnoxious he was, how much money, and it really became this kind of David versus Goliath situation because you
Right.
saw him pouring all this money into it, himself making this omnipresent figure in the race, and Democrats kind of just they stayed on issues, they stayed on policy, and they sort of sat back and like let him be, the creator of his own destruction. And I think there's a model there that can be replicated for Democrats. Like, I think sit back and just let these people burn their own, you know, town down in a way. And I think this race is very emblematic of that. And again, as you said, it's going to have, profound impacts for the people of Wisconsin. And again, a ripple effect to even the House of Representatives. So kind of a fascinating look at, this moment in political history, so to speak.
Yeah, well, there are a couple of things. One is that I think that what you said about the Democrats letting Musk and them do that, yeah, they did, but they also, I think, did a good job finally in a microcosm of explaining what their candidate stood for and what it
Right,
meant for their candidate to get elected, as
right.
opposed to just saying that guy's bad, that guy's bad, that guy's bad.
Mm-hmm.
I think the other part is, to your point, like Elon Musk has never been elected to anything. And look, I worked on a campaign for a very big company years ago, in a pretty progressive town where they picked a fight with the city council. And no kidding, over the course of 30 days in an ill-advised ballot measure campaign, Abby, they spent $1 million a day, right?
Wow.
And lost by like a mile, right? Which, and everybody in town was laughing at this very big, very powerful company, right? And they just oversold like their own idea of what it is they could do, and most importantly, I think what money in politics can do, which, as I've said previously, and I've written too many times, in my political experience, money does not buy you victory; it buys you options. In this case, it gave Elon Musk and the Republicans a lot of options, but it didn't give them victory because, again, this was more than about just how much money you could spend. I think the other part too that's heartening for Democrats in coming races, in when I say winnable, let me say winnable races, because I think this is an important distinction, is that when Trump isn't on the ballot, Republicans don't do as well. And that's one thing. My friend Trygve Olsen, who I've had on the show and everybody's heard before, had some research that he shared with me that, Abby, and I don't know if I've said this before, that let's just say that
And he's a Wisconsin guy,
he
right?
is a Wisconsinite, yes, and Todd Albaugh, all my friends up there. I had a recent post up at 24 site about my love of the Cheesehead State. You guys should go read that. But that if, let's say that in a given issue, if you asked Republicans, were they for an issue, and they came up with 50, they said 50% of us agree with it, right? Just to make the math easy. But if you said on this issue, Republicans and Donald Trump agree with it, right? Among Republicans, it goes from 50 to 66, right?
Wow.
His name in his presence gave it a 16-point bump, right? So it's counterintuitive, but in races like this, you're better off not invoking Trump because you don't attach him for Republican voters. And if it's not attached to him specifically, then it's not as interesting. And of course, this is not unusual in a personality driven authoritarian sort of movement, right? That's not, and that's the other part too, is we've seen all this stuff about Democrats. Okay, yeah, they're very unpopular. They're at 27%, but the Republican Party's at 36, right? They're not popular either. Republicans in and of themselves, are not popular either. And so I think that was a very smart strategic move to not make the race about Trump. I think it was a little bit about Elon, but you couldn't help that just because, as you said, he
Right.
wouldn't go away. Um, And so I think it was an important thing. I think there were a lot of lessons to learn there. I think a lot of good lessons. And obviously, I think, too, Ben Wickler, who was the state party chair there, knows his state cold. Very, very good operator. And again, I think this is one where we have seen in a lot of places where a normal, competent Democrat or liberal justice, as this woman is Walsh, can beat the MAGA crazy, because without Trump there, they don't get that bump, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no. And I think to your point, which I think is a very critical one, you're right. Like, it wasn't just that they didn't invoke Trump or Musk so much on the winning side of this, but what they did, to your point, is they did define her well. They did define her on these issues. And like, you look at a state like Wisconsin, particularly post Dobbs, like they had, a quote unquote trigger ban on the books, a 175-year-old law that like went into effect after Roe v. Wade fell. And then there was all this confusion in the state as to like whether things were legal, whether they wouldn't. And there was some flip-flopping, in terms of the courts and sort of what, just a lot of confusion around it. So I think people did really see on that issue in particular the importance of the Supreme Court, the state Supreme Court in the state, which is great. And I think they were able to kind of amplify that and say like, hey, this does matter. As we've seen, this really does matter. And you and I have talked about this. There is a problem. You can't run on vibes, right? You can't just run on vibes, as we kind of talked about around 2024. And what they did is they made it not just an anti-campaign. They made it a here is why you should vote for this person
Right.
campaign, which is different. And I do feel like that is what is missing right now among Democrats. They're just railing against Trump, railing against Musk, but they're not really saying what they would be doing if they had the White House at this time, or
Right.
if they had, the majority in the House, or things of that nature. In this case, in this race, they did do that very effectively. And I think that was kind of the 1-2 punch as to why we saw success in Wisconsin last night. But broadly, I think people need to extrapolate those lessons and be like, you can't just be anti something. You have to be for something and get that message out to people. Otherwise, hey, they might not vote for the other guy, but they're not going to come out for you necessarily. And you and I have talked about that on numerous occasions. Like, it wasn't so much that Trump won by these crazy, crazy margins. It's just Democrats stayed home.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Again, it's got to be the end of anti, right? And the idea that someone is going to be there to protect you, and this guy, I can't remember his name. It doesn't matter at this point. He's a footnote in history. But he was going to be a weirdo, right? And people want normal, especially for judges. Theoretically, you'd want somebody normal. And I think that Wisconsin, like your home state of Minnesota, do tend to be pretty good bellwethers of the country's sentiment. And again, 4 months ago, we were in a much different place. Things swing around. And if we look back to 2018 and 2022, although 2022 was not a win for Democrats, it was a tie, for argument's sake. Without Trump on the ballot specifically, it's not the same dynamic. Now, of course, he's already in power, so there's a lot of other things that can and will change over the coming weeks and months, unfortunately, before the 2026 midterms. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, on the flip side of this whole dynamic, down in Florida, there were two special elections. Florida won, which is Matt Gaetz's old district. That's the panhandliest part of the Panhandle, which is basically Alabama. This guy, Jimmy Patronis, who was the chief financial officer of the state, won. Not a surprise. Like, that was never that district. If it goes Democrat ever, it's because the sun has exploded or something, Abby, right? Now, in Florida 6, which is another very conservative district, Mike Waltz, he of the Jeffrey Goldberg Signal chat and the Gmail for professional use fame now, as Trump's national security advisor, won that same seat in 2024 by 30 points. And so he left. It was open. This guy, Randy Fine, who is as odious politically, personally. I mean, you look at him, you're like, this is not somebody I want to deal with. His opponent, progressive Democrat, raises $10 million, right? $10 million. Randy Fine raises $1 million and wins by 14 points. Okay, is it 30? No. But it's it was never in doubt. And that was,
Halved.
yeah, it
Yeah.
halved. Yeah. But let's, okay, for argument's sake, like, so if these two ran again in 2026, maybe Fine wins by 7. That's not to say that they should not have put up a good fight. I think they did. I think it's the realistic nature of how Democratic donors and the Democratic machine tends to find ways to spend a great deal of money in places they never really have any hope of winning. And that could
Mhm.
be Florida 6, that could be Texas, that could be Kentucky, that could be South Carolina, wherever it is. Again, I'm not saying you shouldn't compete. You should compete everywhere. But it's also, again, money is a finite resource. It is the mother's milk of politics. And you should allocate your resources according to where you think you can not only be competitive, but also where you think that that kind of money will tip the balance. I'm not entirely sure that Florida 6, that the 6th district down there was ever going to go for a Democrat. And again, I don't know that it would in 2026 either. But, this is one where lots and lots of like huzzahs and hurrahs and everything else for Wisconsin, radio silence on Florida, right? So all I'm saying is, like, I think we should learn lessons both from victory and defeat.
Mhm. I guess though, to that point, and this idea of victory versus defeat, like and you are something more familiar with the politics of Florida than I am. Um, what is your take on the fact that, it went from a 30-point race to a 13-point race? Like, do you think that's a positive sign I mean, obviously it's like a positive trend for Democrats,
Right.
but do you think it's just kind of, the moment, like Trump's already in power, it's kind of, the opposition sort of tailwind type of a thing? Or do you think that there's a real sign that there is some discontentment around, what we've seen thus far, in Trump's X number of days since he's been in office?
It's the right question, and one I don't have a good answer to. I think it could be a number of those things, as we talked about. He's not on the ballot, and therefore, again, the supercharging of a whole bunch of people who are only really Republicans because of him. Maybe they just
Right.
stayed home, but I think I'd want to look at the data a little bit more and see what happened. I assume there was a surge in Democratic votes too, so it could have been both, right? It could have been, if those 15 points that were the difference between what Waltz, ran on and what Fine won by on Tuesday. If it was 7.5 points of Republicans staying home because they don't care or they weren't worried about it, and 7.5 points of disaffected Democrats in a very red district showing up because they're excited, that would seem to make sense to me. But I think we'd have to look at the results and see
Yeah.
who showed up, who didn't. All right, let's take another turn, and this time we're going to get on the highway up I-95 from Florida 6, Abby, and show up in your neighborhood behind enemy lines inside the Beltway. So lots of joy across the online left that Cory Booker, senator from New Jersey, conducted a 25-hour filibuster on the on the floor of the United States Senate. And there has been a lot of ink and zeros and digital words dropped and videos and everything else about what a big deal this is. Maybe it's my cynical nature. Maybe it's my jet lag. Maybe it's my lack of sleep, Abby. Like, good on you, Cory, right? I'm glad you broke Strom Thurmond's record or whoever the hell it was, right?
Yeah, it was
Um,
Strom Thurmond.
Right. But like, I'm just not like, as a sort of like stake in the ground moment, my immediate sort of viewpoint is, Abby, okay, like, you could have done this on January 21st. You could have done this before any one of these goons, from Kash Patel to Pete Hegseth to anybody, took office, right? You could have had somebody lined up to go behind you. Like, I just, it seemed like something where, once again, one person decided to stand up. I'm glad he did, and do something. And it got people activated and energized. But I don't know, in the long run, it's not just more dust in the wind.
Yeah. So I do look, there was a lot of merit to the points he made. Obviously he made a lot of great points as to like what we're seeing in terms of, leadership right now from the White House. And you're right, like he did stand up and he did do something. But like, I do believe that it is just like the epitome of grandstanding. It's not even technically like it didn't block any legislation even. Like it wasn't, there was no real purpose to what it was other than, rhetoric. And I'm not saying that it's not a good tool and it's not something Democrats should use. And, obviously, I really do believe that, what people say does matter. And he made a lot of good points. But as you said, like, I think this could have been deployed at a moment where there was an impactful legislative outcome for it, that it could have had a greater impact. Or to your point, don't do it alone, dude. Like, get a couple other people to stand up there with you and like, let's make this a couple day thing, And even when we look back at Strom Thurmond's record, like his had, I believe, and I'm no historian, but like if we Google it, like I'm pretty sure he had like some real impactful like legislative results of his record. So it's kind of a little bit of a bummer. Not a bummer, but you know what I mean.
No, he was a bummer. No question about it.
Yeah. Big bummer.
Strom Thurmond was a bummer.
Big bummer.
Remember, just historical footnote, Strom Thurmond ran for president in 1948 on the Dixiecrat ticket, Abby, and won the Confederacy. He won electoral votes.
Yeah. So look, let's wipe that guy off the record board. No problem.
Right.
Like, great. Good on it, Cory Booker. But like, again, like I think this is a tool. It can be used, absolutely. But it's a little different than when we think about Wendy in Texas.
Wendy Davis,
right?
yes. Mm-hmm.
Wendy Davis in Texas and sort of her filibuster and, the fact that it really did prevent at that time, like a 20-week abortion ban to go into effect, which is such a wild thing to think about now,
right?
Kind of given the state of things, but especially in Texas. But
yes, where now basically you can be a bounty hunter if you wanted to. Yes.
Yeah. So, but when you look at like Wendy Davis and stuff, I do think again, it sort of speaks to this thing that you and I, have talked about ad nauseum a bit, where it's what is the goal here? What is the strategy behind it? And what is the organization behind some of these like moments that Democrats are trying to, make he had the spotlight. He had the spotlight for 25 hours. And yes, again, he said some really great things, but like to what end? And also what more could there have come out of it other than, wiping a racist off the record books? And I think it speaks to this, kind of this low calorie thing that we're kind of seeing from Democrats right now. It's like you have Gavin Newsom running around and doing podcasts with Charlie Kirk and like trying to, I don't know, plead to the middle. Like, I don't know why are you talking to that goon? I just don't understand it. And then you have other folks, who was it? Maxwell Frost and Chris Murphy, they're going around and kind of giving these sort of on a tour again. You have obviously Bernie and AOC, and theirs is a little different. Like they are really getting, some real response, and I think there's a lot of substance there as well.
Well, they're both famous, and I'm sorry to interrupt. They're both famous politically, and they've been saying this stuff for in Bernie's case 60 years, right?
Yeah.
And in AOC's case since she came to office. So they also have a level of credibility with their audiences that I think other people don't.
Right. 100%. Like I just think in the case of this filibuster and Cory Booker, great, glad he did it. But again, like what more can they be doing that has an actual impact on people's everyday lives? Like, I don't know how many people other than us dorks who are on a podcast talking about him right now, and then the 15 people that watch C-SPAN, like if anybody else really was tuning in to like what he was actually saying or the points he was making.
But Abby, 400 million views on TikTok, right?
Yeah, but what does that even mean? Like, I don't know.
I don't know either. But I do know this. I know that he sent a fundraising email out as soon as he was done, right?
Yeah.
Which again is just like, really. I mean, I'm not some babe in the woods. I'm not offended by it, but it's just so like, it's so par for the course, right? Like, did you like, okay, you stood for 25 hours. Like, okay. Like that's,
you're already,
look, could I stand for 25 hours? I don't know. Right. Is it a physical feat? I suppose so, right? It's not running an ultra marathon, of which you know something about, I don't think, right? At altitude. It
Yeah.
was standing on the floor of a pretty well air conditioned building, talking. And like I said, I don't, he said he put his body on the line. Like, you're not on the front lines in Ukraine. Like, please don't tell me this stuff, because that's the part too, is it goes from something that could be important and symbolic to something like, are you kidding? Now, let me just say one more thing about the town halls and what's part of the plan, because I wrote this, I think, earlier in the week, is if we're going to do all these things, and I put we in this bucket, is there some plan? Is there some idea? So going back to Sanders and Ocasio-Cortez, right? Interesting, they're taking on oligarchs, okay, and they're focusing not on lefty social issues, but on the things you're talking about, economic issues of working class Americans, right? And they're very clear about that's the line they're going to stand on. And I think, frankly, probably the best one that we all have, because as we have seen, and we're going to see more and more individual Americans, typically the ones who cannot handle it, right, or cannot afford it, are going to be hurt the worst. And so that is the bridge to stand on and say no more. But then in Texas, you've got Beto O'Rourke and Tim Walz, both of whom I like. They're in Fort Bend, which is outside Houston, right? They're both very good at this. But what breaks out in the middle of their town hall meeting? Tax the churches, tax the churches. Like, Abby, this is Texas. Like, even Democrats go to church in Texas, right? So it's just like, it just felt like, so like, instead of, and I know I'm guilty of this too. We've talked about it. We've talked about it a bunch of times, right? The X and Y axis of politics. And so Ocasio-Cortez and Sanders are keeping it very close to the ground, the 0-0.
Yeah.
And when you hear tax the churches, you're going back up the Y axis and further away from what people, it's not that they don't care about it. It's just like, what are you talking about? Like, of all the things you could be talking about right now, like, why is this the one that's bubbling up from the gathering of people? And then the other question is, like, are these, there's a big protest, I think nationwide protest, scheduled for this weekend, April 5th. I think it's like 50501, something like that. 50 states, 50 cities, maybe DC. I don't know. Anyway. All right. Are all the people who are going to those, like, have they been collected somewhere? Okay. If they're being collected, to what end? Right. And if the answer is like, no, we're going to deploy them 18 months from now for to volunteer on our campaigns, or we're going to ask them for money, like, you're strike one, strike two, right? Like, we need those same people who are fired up to be doing things in the same states in which they're living, whether or not that's running for office, agreeing to be a poll watcher, registering voters, or, as I've said now a million times, working in their communities that in many places are going to be harmed by what we're seeing from the government. And so that's, for me, and, back to your point, is like, good on you, Booker. Great. Good on you, Murphy and Frost and Beto and Waltz and everybody else. But, like, what is the point, right? Is this additive, or is this, to your point, just a sugar high, right? Like, I'm
Right.
just going to eat this Snickers bar. I'm going to feel really good for about 20 minutes. And then I'm going to go into, I'm going to crash. And I'm going to be looking around going, well, what was that all about?
Right. And to that point, like, good on them. We're seeing so little leadership from Democratic parties, specifically Democratic leadership right now, that, like, I'm so glad that there are a couple people out there at least trying something, at least talking. But I do feel like it's this hodgepodge, like, mismatch of, what are they doing to what end? Like, it doesn't feel like there's a real strategy to, address some of these ongoing issues at the, you and I talk about this a lot, but, like, at the grassroots level, and, like, invest in it and, like, rebuild this infrastructure around the party that, has atrophied over the last numerous, like, presidential cycles,
Yeah.
and it is, yeah, I don't know, but you kind of did make me laugh. So this is a very, very quick aside. So, speaking of taxing churches, so my mom, um, so was at church, Irish Catholics. That's who we are. And this was probably I don't know if this would have been 2020 election. The priest made a plea basically to during one of the masses to, like, vote for Donald Trump on the issue of abortion. And my mom wrote the world's longest, most scathing email to the priest. And her sign off line was, P.S. If the Catholic Church wants to get involved in politics, maybe it should start paying taxes, which I actually thought was very clever of my mom. But even her, this MSNBC loving,
Right.
Minnesotan, is not going to say that that is an effective policy platform to
Right.
run on. Like, it's just not. Even if she wanted to burn the priest, like, it was,
Right.
it's a good quip, but it's not necessarily, there's so many other things. And
Yeah, well, and it's not like proselytizing and politicizing the pulpit is anything new, right? Like
no,
this
not
is
at
not new.
all. Yeah.
This is not
It
new.
was, yeah, it was funny though, because afterwards my dad was like, you realize like you can't go back now. And she's like, why not? It's like, what? But
Right.
that's my mom for you.
Right.
But yeah, I think like, you know, when we're looking at it, like what is the Democrats' message right now? It just feels like there's spaghetti all over the wall, and none of it's like really sticking. And again, to Gavin Newsom, like he's attacking his party, he's hanging out with Charlie Kirk, going after, kind of these, hot button social issues without like a real, pitch as to what he would be for.
Yeah.
But again, he's one singular figure within the party, so obviously not to define the entire party by him.
Right.
But his name is thrown around constantly as to a top contender for 2028, as we saw in the Puck article that you actually referenced.
Ugh.
So it's just, but so it's just one of those things where I don't know. And again, great job, Cory Booker. Also, thank you for giving me a shout out. I did run 100 miles in under 30 hours. So standing at a lectern and not peeing is like cool. Like, cool, bro. I'm like, great work.
Right.
But like,
only a man would take credit for standing in the same place for 25 hours and talking, right?
Yeah. Cool.
But
me.
this is, let me just say this. Then I want to get on to the article that we talked about, we mentioned, is that, I have not ever been shy about criticizing the Democratic Party for its various misdeeds, losses, inability to campaign, all of those things. But I'll tell you, I think that, you've heard Newsom, you've got Ezra Klein out there hawking his new book. I actually bought it because I want to read it. I'm going to see what I think of it.
Like hate read or like it?
I don't know yet. We'll see.
Let me know. Give me a clip note.
Yeah, I'll send it to you. But I think I'm sort of over like the Democratic brand sucks. Okay, got it. If we all agree that the party needs to be better, then let's start the process of making it better, right? Like I don't know that there are any more points to be made or scored by continually saying, the party sucks. Like both parties suck. No one likes either party. So it's not as if, and this is not a new phenomenon either, Abby, right? It's not like the Democrat or the Republican Party have been popular among the broad swath of voters for many years. We're stuck with it, right? Like we have two bad options. We have vanilla, we have chocolate, right? Like that's it, right? We got mustard, we got ketchup. That's it. Those are the only things we have on offer. And if you had it my way, and I've tried this over the years to get us more options, I'd love that. But if there's only there's actually only two things that the parties agree on. One is campaign finance, and I don't care what any Democrat leader says about campaign finance. Like, yes, they may want money out of politics, but they're never going to get money out of politics. And the second is they don't want competition. Neither one of them, right? And so if you said, well, if I came to you, Abby, and I said, you're the chairwoman of the Democratic Party, Abby, we both agree that the country needs a sane center-right party. So what I'm asking you to do is call all the governors and secretaries of state in blue states and say, make it easier for Reed's new center-right party to get ballot access. Do you know what you would say? Get out of my effing office, right? Like that's not something that would happen.
Yeah.
So, all right. So the last thing I want to talk about today is, and I think has some resonance for the rest of what's going on with leadership. And I think really where I think too many of the insiders still don't understand the world we're living in is there's a newsletter thing called Puck. And it's very well researched. It's got excellent writers, but they are an insiders uh, deal, right? Very inside on politics, very inside on finance, very inside on fashion and entertainment and media. And I'm a subscriber, although my two favorite writers have since left. But they had a very deeply researched and reported story, Abby, about the fact that the DC Democratic consultant community is starting to get its ducks in a row about who they want to run in 2028 and who they want to work for in 2028 because of the vast amounts of money that would be on offer and the possibility in one line that said, because if you're the campaign manager or consultant for one of these candidates who would potentially win in 2028, you could be chief of staff. Now, let me just say from personal experience, the reason why I know that I made the wrong decision to go work for John McCain had nothing to do with John McCain and had everything to do with me, because this was the exact mindset I went into it, which is I thought John McCain was going to win the Republican nomination, and I thought he was going to be president, and I thought he was going to be I was going to be one of those guys carrying the briefcase, walking across the South Lawn to Marine One, talking to one of my colleagues, laughing at a joke that no one else in the world knew, right? And that was the exact wrong reason to go to work for John McCain. He deserved better than that, right, from me. And I failed in that regard. And that is what seems to me to be rife still within the Democratic Party. This is a party that lost everything in 2024. This is a party that spent upwards of $2 or $3 billion to lose everything in 2024. This is a party whose insiders continually make the wrong decisions and do the wrong things and campaign in the worst possible way and are still there waiting for the next thing to come around so they can get rich or they can get famous. And it seems to me, and I say this not about the individual big D Democrat, but of the party superstructure at the top, that I still don't think they understand the nature of the fight we're in. And I'll stop my rant with this. And I think part of it is because none of them have really had to put anything on the line yet. None of them have had to say, if I do this, it could be the end of my career, my friendships, all these other things. And so when I see this, and it go back to this dinner I've mentioned many times, it just seems to me that they think that the world will somehow still right itself between now and 2028. It might. We might get radical reconstructive surgery as a democratic republic in these next 3 years. I'm not buying it, but I'd love to get your sense of why these stories are written, why reporters want to write these stories, and and I'm asking a question I already know the answer to, and why so many consultants are willing to be named in these things 3 years before the next presidential election.
Yeah, I mean, the human ego is a real thing. And the more ink that is spilled around these consultants, the bigger their names become ahead of the race, the more that they'll likely get tied to people. And it's just this snowball effect of egoism and recognition. And ultimately, to your point, it's like, what is sort of why? Like, are they just trying to pick the winning horse? Do they actually care about these things? Like, do they want to back, whether it's Gretchen Whitmer or Gavin Newsom or
Right.
Joe Schmo? Like, do they actually want to back them, like, because they believe in it, or is it just politics for politics' sake? And I think that's the scary thing, that we are in a very, very troubling time right now. We are in a situation where there are so many Americans whose rights are being assaulted, who are struggling, and who are going through this. And to read an article like that, it almost makes your eyes bleed, because you're just like, you guys messed up. Like, you didn't win. And it is affecting so many people's lives in really, really real detrimental ways. And yet they're just talking about, okay, in 3 years, I just want to have the winning horse to get to the White House, so then I can be chief of staff. Chris Whipple will write about me. And then after that, I'll make a bunch of money.
Right.
And on the speaker circuit or whatever. And it is frustrating and it's upsetting because it sort of does away with the real humans that are struggling right now as a result of the failures that we saw in 2024. And I don't know, reading that article, as you said, you wanted to throw it out the window on the plane. Yeah, it just felt so calloused and so far removed from like people's actual lives that are
Right.
really being affected. Sorry to be on a soapbox about it, but like,
No, and that's listen, I'm climbing up there with you because to me, when I get asked these questions, and I've been asked this, I mean, I don't know, 10 times in the last 2 weeks as I've been on the road, why can't we come up with a message? Tell me what you believe in, and I'll come up with your message. These
yeah,
people don't believe in anything, near as I can
yeah,
tell, other than their own wealth and self-aggrandizement and fame and access to power. Who does that sound like? Right? Who does that sound like? It doesn't, there's
ding,
no,
ding, ding.
right? So, like, to me, it's like, if you want to start fixing the party, and I'm speaking to everybody out there who listens, who's an activist or a donor, right? How about this? Not one more dime to any of you until you show me how you're actually going to win in such a way that's actually going to help the country, right? Because if it's
Yeah,
just one more, cycle around the bend of give me all the money because it's the end of the world, and if we don't do this, right, it's the most important election of our time. Like, nobody's buying it, from the billionaire to the pauper. No one's buying it anymore, right? We failed. Democracy, right? You know why democracy didn't work as a message, Abby? Because democracy hasn't worked, right? That's a very hard lesson for me to learn. It breaks my heart, but that doesn't make it not true. And it really frustrates me when the people who are supposed to be at the forefront of the opposition and figuring out, because they have the ballot access and the access to the funds and the access to real leaders and everything else, or theoretical leaders, I guess, are the ones going, yeah, a couple of years, we'll get on the train, we'll build our Iowa team, we'll build our New Hampshire team, we'll build our South Carolina team, and I'm going to maybe, I'm younger, so maybe I'll go with the second or third tier candidate, but I'll do a great job, and then I'll get hired up by one of the bigger campaigns. And then, if that one doesn't work out, then maybe I'll get on the nominee campaign, or I'll work at the convention, but I'll be there because you know what, like, I'm going to get a job at the White House or at the DNC or whatever it is. And I'm just like I've played that game, right? The difference was, and people can disagree with me, like the guy I worked for, like I started working for in college, like I really liked him. He was my guy, right? Now, a lot of people don't
right.
have access to that. But at least there was in the moment in which I started working for George W. Bush, there was a belief system. Remember, this was a guy who in Texas, his biggest issues were education and immigration, pro education and pro immigration, right? Like, that's how far from where I started with him was. And so now just to see this, it's so callous and so cynical, right? And if you're telling me these are the people who are supposed to be leading the campaigns and leading the party into the next 2 or 3 years, I'm very, very worried that they're focused on the wrong things, which is themselves, as I said, I have certainly been guilty of, instead of what the country really needs, which is something that, again, I think the answer to what the country needs is obvious. One, it's not what we have, but two, it's not saying, well, just not what we have, right? It's going to have to be something different, and dare I say, radically different.
Well, and I think there are so many pressing issues and pressing elections between now and 2028
Yes.
that should be the conversation right now. Like, why are we already trying to anoint the next Democratic nominee for president when we haven't figured out all this other stuff, but on the runway, but between now and takeoff? And it's like, how are you also going to know what is going to work in 2028 unless you're paying attention to what people are saying on the ground now, unless you're in Florida 6 or in
Right.
Wisconsin and working these things and focusing on building up a message and an infrastructure that can actually be effective and matter in 2028. Look, like, Donald Trump lost in 2020 and came back and won in 2024. It's like he was a loser and
Yeah.
he won again. Like, what? like, what more
Right.
flashing, like, change oil lights do you need
Right.
than that? Like, I just don't get it. He's a senile old dude who, gets oranger every day, honestly, also. But, like, I just don't quite get why we're already even talking about it and that there's this rat race already underway. And I know it's like politics are going to be politics, but I don't know. I think it's really distressing, especially now, given the real repercussions that we're already seeing
Right.
just a short couple of months into the latest Trump administration.
Right. And
Sorry.
look, no, don't be sorry. And this is just to close out the thought on this. I mean, that's why when I read it, I was just, there's so much work to be done, right, at the local level. And there's such a bias towards, but we have to do something now that will work now. And as I have said, it took us a long time to get here. There is no magic wand, there is no silver bullet. The work that needs to get done needs to start now. Go to jointheunion.us and
Yeah.
get involved with your local communities, whether or not food pantries are already in trouble. Shelters for abused women and children, like where I live, are already in trouble. They zeroed out the budget for it, right? There are real things that need to happen in your cities, in your neighborhoods, in your communities, right? And if those same Democrats who want to run presidential campaigns have any hope of winning anything, then they're going to sure as hell have to figure out how to get back the voters who didn't show up for them last year, right? And those who are available to them that either went to Trump because they didn't like the other option or stayed home, and those disaffected Republicans, independents like me who said, I'm never going to be a Republican again. I'm not sure about the Democratic Party. And if all you're doing is sitting around talking to reporters for, a $200 a year newsletter about why you should be first in line for whoever the next, hero is, like, you're doing it wrong. And if look, I get it. Politics is a business. I've been in it all my life. I'm not under any illusions about it. It just seems to me, Abby, and I'll finish with this, to be one more example or illustration of why we need to find those leaders and those spiritual and philosophical and political leaders who will lead polls, not follow them.
Yeah. No. Endorsed.
All right.
Yeah,
Okay.
I absolutely agree. Totally.
All right. So we got a couple of minutes left here, Abby, before I let you go. So give us something you're hearing from behind the lines there in Washington. You've got friends who are in the fight in the trenches every day. What's something that you can share with us that you found interesting, upsetting, concerning, hopeful, anything?
Oh, it's kind of bleak in
Mm.
DC right now, given the number of jobs that are being cut, and
Uh,
everybody's fighting for the same jobs. I've had numerous friends who are seemingly losing jobs due to their political affiliations, and others whose jobs are just now no longer exist. And DC, speaking of a rat race a little bit, it's just individuals, very smart, talented, hardworking individuals are scrambling for throwing their resumes in the same pile over and over. And it's, I don't know, DC's weird right now, man. Like, if I'm being honest.
well, as someone who grew up there till I was 15 and has left, went back a couple of times, there is nothing wrong with leaving. In fact, the
Yeah.
water is fine outside 495. It's actually better.
Yes.
All right,
Mm-hmm.
Abby, thank you for coming back. We'll get you back more often. But before we let you go, where can our listeners and viewers, hello out there, find you online?
Yeah, on X, I'm at Abigail Tracy, and on Instagram, I'm at Abby Tracy.
Awesome. As always, gang, you can find me on says.us. Sign up today. Twitter and TikTok at Reed Galen. On Jesus, where am I even now? And Instagram and Threads. Sorry, Abby. At Reed_Galen USA. Gosh, it's been a long week, guys. Sorry for the brain fart there. Abby, thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Reed. I always like being here.
Oh, and everybody else, we'll see you next time. All right.